So I did that presentation, which was really, really successful. And then even getting a job in the professional environment, it was just barrier after barrier. People don't want to accept you. It was really difficult. And I actually think if I didn't have the right support, I don't know if I would have been able to continue, because it was so hard. I had one person in the workplace, and then I started reaching out to other lived experience professionals, because these people just didn't get why I was struggling. And at times, I didn't really have the words for why I was struggling, because it's almost like a trauma response. You're going back to that, and it's people being confrontational or shutting you out of things. It was really, really difficult to be accepted in the workplace.
Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
Today's guest is Kierra Myles, who's a Mentor Co-ordinator working with children in care and care leavers. She was first arrested when she was just 11 years old and remanded into a secure home when she was 13, before receiving her first custodial sentence at just 15 years old. Kierra's fought hard to break down the external barriers that prevented her from securing a role working with young people, and is now helping others to do the same. Kierra is also a keen martial artist and competes in Brazilian Jiujitsu. Welcome, Kierra.
Thank you, Naomi.
Hi, Kierra. Very nice to meet you today. So, can you tell us a bit about your pathway into working with children and young people? Is this something you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, so I always wanted to work with children and young people. So when I was in prison when I was 15 and they were talking about careers and stuff, I was like, I want to work with children. And I remember them saying, you'll never be able to do that because of your criminal record. And we had loads of conversations about why that was, and because I'd been labelled a violent young offender. But my argument was always that was never it was never any harm to children. So obviously I was a child at the time, so why not? And the more people tried to tell me I couldn't do things, the more I was like, I'm going to do this one day. But I wasn't in a place where I could do that yet. So that took time. And when I was 21, I was at college and I was doing my GCSEs. And I went to try and volunteer at the local youth service. And they said that I could, but I needed to come back once I had 5 years of no convictions. And by that point, it had been about 3 years or so. So I remembered the date and I remembered everything I needed. And when that time came, I rang them and emailed them and rang them and emailed them, and nobody ever got back to me. And I tried to volunteer at the children's home that I'd the children's home I lived at. I went and knocked on the door and spoke to the workers, and I tried to volunteer at secure children's home, and just nobody got back to me. So I kind of just came across all these barriers. And when I was competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I had a few injuries and I had to have 2 operations quite close together. I snapped my ACL, which is a ligament in your knee, which needed to be replaced by part of my hamstring, and I tore the labrum in my shoulder, so that needed to be stitched up. So I was out of doing everything for a few months, actually for quite a long time, but I was out of work for 2 months signed off while I did my rehab and stuff. And I was just doing little bits because I was bookkeeping at the time, so I was working in an office. And I just remember, this is 2018, the end of 2018, the beginning of 2019. So at this point, I'm much older, and I'm there, and I'm just thinking, all of these medals and competitions, I love it, and it's been a massive part of my journey to get to where I am and to understand my emotions. But my purpose is to work with children and young people, and I need to start telling people where I've got to with no help from the services. And that was kind of how I started getting myself out there and speaking to people. Sorry, that was quite a long answer, but I wanted to let you know the barriers along the way as well, and how I actually got there.
You can hear your passion, Kierra, for that you have that determination to work with children. But I suppose I was struck by something that you said early on, because I've seen that crop up in Oasis assessments, where someone's recorded as being a risk to children because they offended against a child, but it was when they were a child themselves. And there doesn't seem to be much thinking about whether that's a risk as an adult to a child or as a risk to a peer?
Yeah, so I have quite a few violent offences. Actually, I wouldn't use the language violent actually, but I use it because that's what's written in my reports. So I have quite a few convictions from, my last conviction was when I was 17. So all of my convictions are while I was a child, and any assault or serious assault was against someone of a similar age, if not older. So it's that none of that's taken into consideration, really. Yeah. I think people are a bit more open now, but it's still for people with that kind of background, especially entering custody, to get into these roles, it's so difficult. And for those people, it's a knockback and it's a rejection. I can speak for myself, I just felt like I didn't realize it at the time because I still didn't have the words and the language, but I was just being pushed back in the corner and told that I wasn't good enough.
I really like the way that you describe how every knockback made you more determined to pursue the pathway that you'd chosen. That suggests really strong will. And it sounds like life could have turned out very differently for you if you weren't so strong and resourceful. What do you think were some of the factors that made the kind of positive difference for you?
So this is something that I reflect on quite often, because as you grow and you look back, you are able to reflect differently, aren't you? And think about maybe that person was more supportive than I felt at the time. But actually, prison, when I was 15 and I went to prison, I went into HMP, and I live in Jersey, Channel Islands. So even though we're part of the UK, it's slightly different. We have one prison, which is mixed, and the only female place to go is on the adult female wing. So the law was that at 15, you could be sentenced and you would go onto the adult female wing. So that's where I went when I was 15. And the first person that I remember really making like a difference to me was a woman who had quite a long prison sentence for drugs. And she was maybe 12 years older than me. And she just spoke to me. I could take in what she was saying. She didn't ask me certain questions. It's like a feeling. And I think it's like that empathy between lived experience people. She'd been to some of the places I've been. She'd lived in some of the places I've been, and she'd been through some of my experiences, but she didn't instantly tell me that. But the way she was, I was drawn to her. And I left that prison sentence, and I was in year 10, and 2 months later I was back in. I got a 9-month prison sentence, and I was just going into year 11 then. So my year 10 and 11 of secondary education was in prison, being barely educated. And we used to play Scrabble most afternoons because that was a rec time, and just giving me that time, there wasn't much to do. So playing Scrabble was quite good, and I was learning like new words, and I'd barely been educated because I was first excluded from school when I was 8, and I went to lots of schools after. So I think that was the first person that really made a difference. But the journey continued after that. When I was 20, I met other people who were like me. And I think that from meeting them and building connections and trust, I was able to start to talk about how I felt and learn my emotions and believe in myself a bit more, because I think I was always determined and ambitious. And when I look back at my life experiences, especially as a teenager, I was ambitious and determined, but I was also really traumatized and angry, and all of my emotions were being channeled in the wrong direction.
Thank you. And I think you mentioned a bit earlier about going to college. Is that right? What were you doing at college?
So I went back to college to resit my GCSE. So actually, when I was 16, I first went to college. I decided if I can't work with children, I liked cooking. So I wanted to be a chef. And actually, my memories of cooking are when I first started getting suspended from primary school, it was before I was expelled when I was 8. I was about 7. And there'd be times where I was out of school and I would go to this like activities club, which I'd go to after school because my mum was at work. So we'd go there after school. And when I was suspended, I'd be there, and the chef would be in the kitchen and she'd be cooking snacks and stuff for when people finished school, and there was always hot meals for the nursery children. So I used to go in the kitchen and do stuff with her. So that's when I first started to enjoy cooking. So that was what I decided I want to be a chef, but they wouldn't let me on the full-time course because I didn't have the qualifications. I hadn't sat my maths and English GCSEs, so they let me on the day release program and said that I needed to get a job to continue to be on there, which didn't last very long. I went back to prison, and when I was 21, I went to college to try and get my maths and English GCSEs because I knew that I needed them if I wanted to progress in anything.
You clearly were very good at spotting chances to pick up and develop yourself. So although chance may have come into it to some extent, it seems as if it was your determination to follow up opportunities when you spotted them that made a real difference. What else do you think we could be doing to help people to follow a pathway out of crime?
So I remember talking about college. I remember one tutor, actually, it was my English tutor. So when I started college, I used to leave at lunchtime, I'd leave at break time. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't go, because that was my experience of school. Now, I really wanted to do this, and I kind of had to learn that you had to go and sit there from 9 till 3 and you had to revise. So over the course of the year, my attendance went up significantly, and I got both my maths and English GCSE, but they wouldn't accept me onto the A-level course because my attendance wasn't high enough. And I remember my English teacher fighting for me to get on there because I think he recognized that I was a child who went into care, a 12-bedroom children's home at 12 years old. I was in and out of secure, I was in prison, and I was really making an effort to try and change. And he'd recognized that, but they still wouldn't let me on. And I think it's things like that, you know, that one teacher, he did fight for me, but the system around wouldn't allow it. And I think that just I continued, and I had a job, and I picked up bookkeeping quite quickly in an office, so I became a bookkeeper. But not everybody can do that. So if we've got somebody who's really willing and wants to stay in education, then we need to do more to support them into it. Now, formal education isn't for everybody, and it wasn't until that age that I could really sit and take it in. But I don't think that chances, you've got to be able to take the opportunities, and change comes from within. But we have to keep giving those chances and opportunities, because young people, they can't always see them, and they don't see another choice. They don't see another path, and they might dip their toes in and then think, I'm going back to this old life because it's easier. We have to be there consistently, putting those things in front of them and not making them feel shameful if they don't complete it or not good enough, because we're just adding to the reasons why they want to continue with the life that they already have.
Thank you, Kierra. We hear something like that quite a lot, that it's actually, you know, determination and persistence from everybody concerned that makes a real difference. So important never to kind of give up on anyone. Why do you think we get it so wrong with children in the care system?
I think that there's a lot of tick box work. So we need to do all of this, and we need to get all of this from you because this is what we need for our managers. And a young person gets lost in that. Now, that isn't every practitioner. And sometimes practitioners want to put a relationship first, but they feel pressured to do these tick box exercises. But I think that we need to listen to young people more and really listen to them. I know that in my work with young people, I talk about it quite often. They'll talk about like these extreme violent thoughts. I let them talk about it. Let's talk it out. And most of it is fear-based. And some of them aren't in a place to recognize that. They think it's about respect, it's about loyalty, it's about not letting people down. But we need to let young people have these conversations and be open about it. And I feel like that's quite an extreme example, but I feel like people shut the conversation down because they're not comfortable with it. And we're not starting to understand and learn about young people, so they just won't talk. That's my experience of the young people that I work with. They just won't talk to professionals.
We were talking to Ray Bishop a little while back. He said that when he was in prison, nobody listens to you. Would that be your experience?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was in prison, I had a personal officer she was actually quite good. She wasn't that old, and she had children of a similar age to me. But in the secure home, so my experience in secure home was quite bad. There's a whole historical childcare inquiry report into my time there, which spans before that, but also my time there. So the first time I went into secure, I was in a cell, a concrete cell with a crash mat on the floor. There was nothing else in there, no wooden furniture, no anything. And as I was in and out of there, often I wouldn't go to school. I didn't get on with the staff. So they'd take the crash mat out in the day. So I'd just be sitting on the cold floor. So there was clearly nobody really listening to young people then, or the people that did want to listen. I remember there was a PE teacher, and he used to, if I was out in like the normal area and not locked in secure, if he could see me getting frustrated, he'd take me out to play football, because that was what I loved, was football. So he would recognize that and think, right, let's go outside and do something positive with this energy and channel it in the right way, instead of just waiting for me to smash the place up. So I think that it's not always, it's reading body language as well as listening in some situations. So young people can't always tell you how they feel and what they're thinking. We need to be able to read the non-verbal cues, just like they do with professionals. And quite often they can sense if you're there for them or not. And that's how that, and other young people, they're really articulate. They'll tell you exactly what's wrong, exactly what they want. But sometimes it's difficult for people to hear, because it tells them that their practice isn't as they think it is. Maybe not for all young people, but for that young person. And that's difficult to take in. So it's easier to maybe push a child to the side than to take that on board. Whereas I like to think that I'm quite open to that, because I think that's how we grow, and that's how we get better as professionals, and that's how we help more young people. By if we don't listen to young people, then we're never going to progress.
It's really it's heartbreaking to think about a child being, sat on a concrete floor, and I'm sure that's happened to lots and lots of children in the secure care system. It's kind of like we lose sight of the fact that they're children, and I wonder if there's something about, as a society, where we're frightened to accept that we're not very good at looking after our children. If children are ending up in secure care, it's because we've let them down as a society. How do you think we've got our priorities right when it comes to thinking about children and what they need?
I think that the focus is too much on risk. I think everything's on risk and mitigating risk. But if you've got a really risk-adverse practitioner, they're completely missing where that young person's coming from, especially if it's a young person that is looking at going into secure. And the more we put on the whole, this child is a risk, we're missing like what's going on for this child, what's happened to them, why are they in this situation, what is external that's pulling them in these directions, what's going on internally, what's their environment like, how have they grown up, who are the trusted people around them. And if we're not looking at that, like the whole picture, and just seeing them as a risk, then they're just getting locked up, whether that's on secure accommodation order, on welfare grounds, or through the criminal justice system. But locking children up is a traumatic experience for them. So we're adding more trauma to their lives.
Do you have any thoughts on how we could help the authority figures manage their fear of the risk better, so that perhaps we don't go down that kind of pathway so quickly?
I think we miss a massive part of funding for activities for children and young people. Now, I mean, there is, in Jersey, we do have youth clubs and we have a good youth service, and lots of young people go there, but a lot of the young people I work with don't go there. Or when they do, they're not allowed back because they do something there which isn't acceptable. But we need like activities, like whether that's, I mean, as you guys know, I'm a massive advocate for sports, so jiu-jitsu, boxing, MMA, football, any of that stuff. But some children are really into poetry and music, or they'd actually really like to do drama, but maybe they're a bit scared to go and do something like that. So there's loads and loads of activities that we know help children get out of what's going on inside their head, because quite often we see young people, there's so much going on, they're so hypervigilant and their anxiety levels are so high that they're behaving in a way that's trying to stop everything that's going on. They're not actually sure which path they want to take either, because they can only see one road. And it's about having relationships with young people and supporting them to get to a place where they do want to go and do activities. And I think that we miss a lot around the prevention side, which is with families and communities. If we're not working with families and communities in a non-judgmental way, and I think that that's where you need people that have experiences. I think a lot of people that work with children and families have some experiences that might have led them down that way. But I mean, people that have been on the real receiving end of those services, to be there and to be helping, but it needs to be in the community.
Yeah, I think you made a couple of really good points there about, so the activity, for instance, those activities are not cheap activities to do, are they, or to try? So if you've got a family that's already stretched resource-wise, then paying for kids to be doing activities sometimes beyond their means, but also those activities that often aren't even available. I live in an area where there's concerns about teenagers acting out destructively, and the solution to that is to get more people to sign up to Neighbourhood Watch rather than address the reasons why children might be behaving destructively in the first place. So hear what you're saying, some good advice there.
That's where I think governments need to be funding this stuff or substituting it so that it's affordable for people, because we know, and it's well researched, that some children are outside on the street because there's nobody at home. Now, that parent could be working, trying to pay the rent and put food on the table. They could be addicted to drugs, or they could just be somewhere else and they're not home, or there's nothing good going on in that home, so the child doesn't want to go home. So they're outside, which makes them vulnerable to exploitation. And if they're already in an environment where there's lots of stuff going on and they don't have much money, so they're hungry and they don't have the clothes that everyone else has got, they're going to make money however they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think things would be different if the criminal justice system placed greater value on lived experience?
Oh, 100%. I think in some ways we're getting there, but I still think we're a million miles away. And I think that having people work within services that have lived experience of the criminal justice system and lived experience of custody, because we know that people who enter custody are really marginalised by systems, then there's a better chance of getting it right. Because I challenge intervention plans all the time, like, this isn't going to work for that young person, and it's because I've got a long-standing relationship with them, and sometimes you're best off trying one or two things instead of having a list of 6 things that we're trying to get them through, because they're not going to do it. With as much support and guidance, it's just too much, because actually quite a lot of it they don't really care about. But if you've got a relationship with someone, and I think that if you have lived experience, in my experience, some of the young people that really are distrusting of services, you can break down some of those barriers and you can speak to them in a way that they understand. You don't need to ask lots of questions about stuff that they don't want to talk about, because some of it you get anyway, even though everyone's experience is different. And I've had young people that have texted me and I've picked them up and we've just driven for an hour and a half listening to music. They haven't wanted to say much, but they've just wanted to be with someone that they feel safe with. And that is what a relationship is about. Now, I know that not in every role that isn't possible. My role is slightly different to somebody who is a yacht worker who has to do certain things. But I think a relationship can still come first before any of those intervention plans. And the more people we have with lived experience working inside the services, the more they have a chance to progress and then get involved in writing intervention plans and policies and procedures. And because what I often see is, okay, we can give you a chance, but you're going to work as a volunteer. And that's just further stigmatizing, in my opinion.
Well, it's not really valuing what extra is being brought by the person either, is it, by virtue of having that experience?
No, like, I started a degree, so I've got 18 months left of my youth justice degree. Now, when I came to working in services, I was obviously very passionate and, advocating for young people and trying to get these young people that are just ignored, listened to, especially when they were starting to voice what they wanted to say. I'm like, why can't you see it from here? And I've been, not invited to meetings that I probably should have been at. And because I didn't have the language that the professionals had, I sometimes was shut down by that. So I was like, I'm going to do a degree to prove that this theory side, which has been very useful, I've learned loads, it's been great, has nothing on lived experience. Because that, where I'm up to, so I've been just over 2 years studying, it's not even come close to my experiences of being in custody as a child, what it feels like, the factors that got me there, what it was like when I left, what all my friends were experiencing, what was happening at home. Like, there's bits and pieces in there, but it doesn't even come close to the feelings of it.
There's quite a lot. It seems like there's quite a trend at the moment for people with lived experience to become criminologists and to pursue that route later in life. Is there much of a trend towards people with lived experience studying for youth work qualifications, do you think?
I think it's really difficult to get involved in. I think sometimes youth work is maybe a bit easier for some people with lived experience to get involved in, but again, it's usually voluntary. It's getting that actual proper pathway, because even if they're only just at the beginning of the process, I haven't been involved in crime I was 31 when I was employed. So it'd been 13 years since I'd last been arrested. Whereas for some people, they're quite close to their experience still. And I think that's where we need to be opening up those doors and creating those pathways. And I think that one of my benefits, especially in the area I live in, was that I'd done so much in my life with no help from the services. Everything I did wasn't with help. None of them helped me. If anything, they were just my experience of going back to college later on in life. That was, again, another knockback. Whereas I think when people are trying to create this pathway and help other people, for some people it's too much. And we have to acknowledge that their experience of the system is really difficult for them to work in. But that's where we need to be supporting them to help them understand the challenges and build resilience. And I think that for me, especially, the people I learned that from was other lived experience professionals that had been working for years in these environments. They were able to help me understand why I found it so challenging.
It just seems there's a massive, as if the burden of responsibility for the resilience is very much at an individual level. You have a passion, you're a strong woman, very determined, and so have managed to draw on your own resources. But actually something about the resilience of society and the system that ought to be making it possible for people to play their best role in society and contribute without it having to be left to someone having to just fight to get there, it seems. And
yes, I remember being like 14, and this is the more you go on and reflect back, 14, and I was in a secure environment, and it was like morning assembly. And I remember being told, you're going to go to prison by the time you're 15, you're going to be dead by the time you're 18, you're never going to achieve anything. And that was the kind of things that we were told. And I just remember, and that we were getting thrown statistics. I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not going to be one of your statistics. But I didn't have enough relational support around me at that time to be able to deal with what was going on. So I was still very much responding to the outside world, trying to keep everybody as far away from me as possible, because they were all the problem and not me. And it was, that kind of thing, which as you grow up, you realize that actually I don't need to respond to that situation. That doesn't matter. And that's where the internal stuff comes from. But still now, even though it's not quite like that, young people still have those same feelings that they're being pushed to the side, that people don't believe they can achieve what they want to achieve. And resilience is developed within relationships as well, isn't it? By people believing in you. Yeah. People believing that you can achieve. And I say this quite often, I had no hope, only ambition, because everywhere I went, there was no hope for me in these places, but I was going to do it. And throughout those years, I wasn't completely on my own, because I developed relationships with people and friendships that support me on the way. And I remember one boxing coach, he used to tell me all the time, like, you can do it, you can get there, you should be doing this, this is what you should be doing, and those things in your ear, when you've already got that drive, he really believed in me.
Yeah, it sounds massive. And you referred them to school, and it often seems as though people in the criminal justice system have not only been failed by their parents and society, but they've also been failed by the education system. Do you think employing people who struggled or were excluded from school might lead to an improvement in policy and strategy around how we manage disruptive behaviour or truancy?
I think that's another area where lived experience is needed. I think it's needed in all areas, because it doesn't mean that it's about balancing out the power. It's not to say that academics don't have the skills, because of course they do. They have loads of skills, but if it's about knowledge exchange. So people with lived experience might not speak the same language as academics, but academics can often, if they are person-centered and relationship-centered, take on what lived experience people are saying. But I think what we have is a lot of not just academics, but professionals they can't take on what lived experience people are saying, so they don't want to employ them, or the lived experience people become a threat because young people usually like them, they get them, they come from the same difficulties, they come from the same background, you know, they know what it's like to wake up and have no breakfast, or to, you know, have to wear like a jumper if they have an extra jumper in the house because it's freezing, or to be out late, and, you know, or maybe they have both parents there, but the parents were always arguing. And so I think that lived experience people, young people are more drawn to them because, and they talk the same language usually. So, you know, it's like that, what I was saying before, it's like a sixth sense, you know, that they feel between each other. But alternative education, I think we miss so much. The same with activities, like the stuff that you can learn boxing, like self-belief, you build resilience because you're having to try and learn to understand and control your emotions under pressure. You're having to learn to breathe through challenging situations, because I often hear like count to 10 and breathe in anger management, like it's the most useless tool that you could possibly give a child who doesn't understand that they're angry. They don't realize that they're that angry. They don't realize they go to 0 to 100 in no time at all. So learning to breathe and develop those emotions while doing an activity is educational. And it's the same with cooking, for example. You can do a maths lesson in cooking because you can make the recipe quite complicated, and let's divide it, and what do we do with this part? And I think we miss a lot with alternative education. And I think that's where sometimes having people that have lived experience of being in alternative education or struggling in the mainstream school environment, working with those young people, you know, you get to know a young person, and everybody especially in alternative education, I think they need to be treated individually. Sometimes there has to be group lessons, of course there does, but I think that we need to understand their individual challenges and support them with them.
Sounds also like some of the professionals could perhaps do with recognising when they feel jealousy or rivalrous, in terms of what you're saying.
Oh, I come against it all the time, and it took me a long time. Actually, it was one of my managers who kept saying it to me, like, "Don't worry about it. This is why." And I couldn't take that on because, you know, that self-worth stuff's still there, especially when I'm in this environment where people have all these like extra qualifications. I couldn't take that in because as a person, that's quite difficult for me to take in anyway. But I started to recognize that actually it's because I've built relationships that they can't build. But that doesn't mean that they can't be sharing their knowledge with me to help in that relationship. And that's where I think the working together needs to be better.
Thank you, Kierra. Great answers there. I can only imagine that you must have faced tremendous barriers when trying to get to work in the criminal justice system. Can you tell us a bit about those barriers and how you overcame them?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it a bit earlier about, you know, trying to volunteer and then trying to go back to, so then I went to speak to people that were quite senior. I ended up in this meeting, and I'd come from my job as a bookkeeper, so I was dressed in office clothes, quite presentable. And we were sitting in this meeting, and it was actually about the struggles of people with criminal records working within services. And they didn't know that I was there with lived experience. And as the conversation started, my passion came out straight away as soon as it got to something a bit tricky. And, you know, I said, this is my experience. And they were really taken back because I presented as someone who was quite articulate, seemed like I had an education, you know, presented well. And as the conversation continued, they were like, you know, you should be employed in these services. And then obviously I had to look for jobs in the services. Once I had that, it wasn't going to be a barrier for me, that whole, you know, criminal record process. Obviously I had to disclose fully what was on it to make sure that was okay. And at the bottom of your DBS, actually, anyway, it says if you're a risk to children or young people or vulnerable adults. And I think that's a box that people need to look at a little bit more. So then it was another 18 months after that before I got a job. But in the meantime, I was asked at a senior management meeting for the government of Jersey to do a presentation on corporate parenting. So I spoke a little bit about my experience, and then I spoke about what I thought would make a better corporate parent, because it was around children in care and care leavers and what we can do to support them. Even though I was a child in care, a lot of my battles were in care, but the criminal justice system. That was, I think, if you've been in care and you've entered the criminal justice system, you're even further marginalized because you can't get a job. You know, you've got all this stigma attached to you. So I did that presentation, which was really, really successful. And then even as working, even getting a job in the professional environment, it was just barrier after barrier. People don't want to accept you, you know, it was really difficult. And I actually think if I didn't have the right support, I don't know if I would have been able to continue because it was so hard.
What was the support you had, you're thinking of particularly?
Yeah, so I had like, I had one person in the workplace, and then I started reaching out to other lived experience professionals, because these people just didn't get why I was struggling. And at times, I didn't really have the words for why I was struggling, because it's almost like a trauma response. You're going back to that, like, you know, and it's, you know, people being confrontational or shutting you out of things. Yeah, it was really, really difficult to be accepted in the workplace.
Does that sound like you had some good friends and colleagues who you were able to speak to and get support?
Yeah, and also the gym. Like the gym's a massive thing. So the end of last year, I don't mind sharing this actually, I was starting to really burn out. I was doing a lot of 16-hour days. A lot of my young people were in the police station a lot and in court, and you know, everything was just a lot was going on all at once. So I was working a lot and I wasn't taking care of myself. And I knew that I was burning out. I've been getting warned for about 6 months, but I can keep going. And it was something that I had to learn, actually, that when you have got lived experience, sometimes your threshold is a lot higher because it's quite familiar as well. So for me, I booked a jiu-jitsu competition. I wasn't in the gym as much as I usually would be, but I still trained and competed. Then I booked a holiday with my son. And since April, I haven't been working those hours. You know, it took a while to wind down from that, but now I'm back in the gym as normal. And that's something now that's like a non-negotiable for me, is I need to be looking after myself. And I do that by spending a lot of time in the gym. And the more time I spend in the gym, the less I'll be drawn into minor disagreements, because I don't need to be drawn into that. So that is something that I learned myself, actually, working in the services. That is something that's very important to me, my emotional well-being, and also how I deal with challenges in the workplace.
Thank you. Yeah, it's important to be able to manage your time, isn't it? Now, moving on a bit, because you've already hinted about this in your references to the gym, because you're a very accomplished athlete, aren't you? Can you tell us a bit about something of your achievements and how sport has helped you in your mental health and well-being?
So after I had my son, a lot of my childhood trauma came up, even though I'd actually dealt with a lot of it. I think that's quite a big thing for women, especially women that have been in care, because I was like, oh my God, they're going to come and take my child away. And that was furthest from the truth, because there was no reason for them to even be involved. But you've got all these, you know, I left the care system at 16. I was asked if I wanted a social worker. I told them not very politely where to go. And I never heard from them again, even though I went back to prison after. So I kind of continued from there. So, and because football was such a big part of my childhood, I played football. I mean, even at my second school, so my second primary school, I was there for 1.5 years before they excluded me, but I played football even in the boys B team. Like, so, and then when I went to my last primary school, there was a girls team there. So I always played football, and I only really stopped when I was 13 because I was locked up a lot. I was quite different to the other girls in the team, or I felt different. So I knew that, and I'd done different sports, but I had a bit of trauma attached to football, so I didn't want to go back there. And I always wanted to box. And when I was a teenager, I was told that I wasn't allowed to box by the care home, because if I learned to punch properly, then I could cause someone even more harm. And where would that lead? When actually it probably would have been the best place was to put me in a boxing gym. So I wanted to do that, but again, there was something inside me that made me a bit nervous. So I started Brazilian Jiujitsu. Well, actually, I started MMA first. I started MMA, and I remember going into MMA gym, and I was the only girl there, and I just loved it straight away. I absolutely loved it, and they nicknamed me Kev. I got this nickname Kev because I was the only girl there, and I think it used to make them feel a bit better about hitting me. They'd be like, "She's not a girl, she's Kev." So there was all that banter and stuff there, which helps build character building and builds resilience, you know. And you do get that in the gym. And then I started doing jiu-jitsu about 6 months later. And I remember thinking, I heard like some people had been away and competed. It was really hard to get an MMA fight from Jersey. So I was like, I want to compete and I'm going to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And the first competition I went to was the Europeans in Lisbon. So it was a massive competition. I remember people saying, you sure you want to go there? Why don't you try one of the smaller ones? And I was like, no, I'm going there. And I won my first fight and then I lost the second fight. And from there, I just continued competing, and I had to learn about dealing with the weight cuts and how I was trying to do too much of that. And then I started competing at a weight that was closer to what I was. And I started winning. And then I remember I had a difficult time. And 8 weeks later, I had the British Championships. And it's these difficult times that I think help push me forward. And then I become a double British champion, and I become a European champion. This is at blue belt. And then I injured myself. So I was out of sport for quite a long time, which is when I started thinking, I want to work with young people. I need to put myself out there. A lot of reflection was done during that time that I was injured, because I'd been training 3 times a day for God knows how long. And all of a sudden I was at the gym once a day doing my physio. I wasn't able to lift my arm up because of the operation on my shoulder. I was on crutches. It was really difficult. And then again, then COVID happened just as I was getting back into it. So then after COVID, I started competing, and I got my purple belt in July, and I competed last month, and I got double gold and silver in a competition in London. So for me, having those goals is really important. And sometimes I'm aware that I have a lot of goals in my career, in my personal life with my family, and in sport, but goals are really, really important to me.
How did you manage the success? Was that a challenge?
Yeah, so when I won the British Championships, I didn't expect to feel like this either. I got my first gold medal, and actually I'd got a gold medal before that, but it wasn't a big competition like that. It was one of the smaller competitions, and I just didn't feel worthy. If only these people really knew about me. And I think because I've been going through a bit of a challenging time those few months, my self-worth was a bit low and all of that kind of thing. Yeah, and then I remember speaking to someone about it, because it's something that I've not always done in my life. You keep stuff in, and so many people come from difficult backgrounds, especially in sports, and it's actually a lot of people feel like that. But even though I felt like I wasn't worthy of it, I never went into a competition thinking I couldn't win it. So I had that, I'm here to win. And if I don't get a gold medal, then I've not succeeded and I need to do better. And even when I get a gold medal, there's still stuff to work on. So I had that mindset anyway. But yeah, that was definitely a challenge.
It's interesting you saying about people often having had difficult backgrounds in sport, and that just seemed to be the case, especially with kind of like boxing and martial arts. And it's interesting that the sport you've excelled in is a martial art, and I wonder if professionals might have tried to dissuade you from this or been a bit judgmental about your choice of sport as being martial art.
Yeah, so when I was young and I lived in care and I wanted to box, I wasn't allowed to. And ultimately they had that decision, and it wasn't like I lived in an area where there was loads of different boxing clubs to pick from and that I could just go on my own. And I don't know if I would have went on my own. It's something that you kind of need support with as well, isn't it? So yeah, I was definitely discouraged from doing it. But but even when you look at some of the greatest martial art artists and where they've come from, a lot of people don't get to be hugely successful unless they've got something driving them behind it, and it's usually adversity. And quite often you go into the gym and you don't know until you get to people in the gym. Don't even know all of my background. Some of them do, but there was people in the gym that I'm not close to that don't even know that much about my background, because it's not I don't go in and talk about it. So you only where it's relevant, really. And with the people that have become, like my friends, it's not that it's a secret, but it's the same for new people coming in the gym that come from that difficult background. I think people like me instantly recognize that. So you're more likely to let them know that they're in a safe space. And I think young people, especially going into martial arts gyms, they're going to find that same acceptance that they find from their group of friends. But it's going to be people that aren't saying it's okay to behave like that, but they're talking about it in a different way. And I think that's really, really important, because that's role modeling, that's mentoring. And that's why I'm so big on getting young people involved in activities, even if it takes them a year to get them to the activity that they want. And I think that's where we need to, you see a lot of 12-week plans, don't you? You know, the funding's been agreed for 12 weeks, but sometimes if you might have a group of 6 young people that have been given 6-week funding to go into this boxing gym, for example. One of them might want to continue, but they've only just started building a relationship with the coach because it's taken them that long, because they've had such a difficult background, and then the funding's not agreed after that. Where does that leave those young people? They just feel rejected again, pushed to the side, not important.
Yeah, it must be a hard experience. And we recently interviewed Dave Harris, who's the founder of the Ringside Charitable Trust, which is campaigning for a specialist retirement home for former boxers. Do you think sports associated with machismo might have something extra to offer to people who've experienced more hardship earlier in life, something beyond something that other sports like football, athletics, rugby might not offer in quite the same way?
Yeah, and if you look at like the work from if you ever read the book The Body Keeps the Score, it talks in there about, you know, martial arts being such a big thing for helping young people recover from trauma, as well as yoga and other things, because like I mentioned earlier, you're learning to breathe and you're learning to deal with your emotions. And if you've got a good coach or even good teammates, like even though you box on your own, but people in the gym with you, that when you're feeling like, if you don't know that those butterflies in your stomach's anxiety and nerves, because nobody's told you your whole life, and you've been told man up or woman up, and, you know, don't cry, get on with it, be tough. You don't learn to recognize those feelings and what they are until someone points them out to you. I didn't know what anxiety was. I didn't know that I felt anxious sometimes. And when I felt like that, I'd become angry, because that's what, you know, and you learn those kind of things and you learn about your emotions. And when you don't always get it right in the gym, so you've got to be persistent, you've got to keep going, especially Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's so technical. You know, I've had times when I've gone in the gym and I've left thinking I've just been like thrown all over the place for the last 2 hours. But why do I even do this? And the next day I'm back doing the same thing, because that's part of it. And what you learn and the growth, that's where I've learned to develop my emotions, is in martial arts. People have helped me along the way, but it's in the gym.
I wondered as well whether, you know, the emphasis on being able to protect yourself that's there in those, because that's quite different from some of the other sports, isn't it? And I wonder whether that might be a great counteraction to, you know, antidote to feelings of vulnerability that might be there if people have been victimised during childhood. So
there's one person in my gym, and he was young when he started, and he started because he was getting bullied, and he's like an absolute machine now. And watching him grow as a person in the gym, even though he comes from quite a different background to the young people I work with, are heavily involved in the criminal justice system, watching him grow and develop, and also find, like, he was so quiet, and find his voice because he was encouraged to talk, and everyone's asking him how he was. And, you know, when people are saying how was school, they actually care. I'm not asking you because I'm not interested. Like, you know, if you've got something to tell me about school, then I'm here to listen to it. And feeling, and that goes back to being listened to and feeling heard, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And you don't always feel like that in the gym, because sometimes, you know, I don't care, carry on, go again. You know, you do get that as well, but that's part of building resilience, you know, being able to keep pushing forward. And it's tough, but the love you get in the gym through that, and the relationships you build during those challenging times in the gym, are strong. It's been a lovely conversation, Kierra, but we always like to ask our guests at the end about how they've maintained their own well-being when doing really challenging work. And it sounds as though sport has been essential to your well-being, but I wondered if there are any other strategies you'd recommend to our listeners. So I love being in nature. Like, I love the sunrise, I love the sunset, I like walking at night when, like, the stars are out. And it's something else I wasn't doing for a while, because I was so busy rushing around driving that a couple of times a week I try and come home, drop my car off, and walk to my training session, and then walk back and just let my thoughts go, you know, go behind me as I'm walking. So being in nature is really, really important to me. And again, that's, you know, if you would have said to me when I was 14, you know, looking up at the stars is going to be really peaceful. I don't know, actually, when I was a kid, I used to like looking at the stars. So I think I somewhere had that in me, but, you know, I wouldn't have been getting up to go and watch the sunrise, unless I had to be up anyway at that time when I was young. But Yeah, so nature is really important to me, and I try and meditate. It's something I find difficult, but I find like jiu-jitsu is meditation to me. Same with boxing and kickboxing, and even cooking. If I prepping my food, I'm just in that mindful state cooking. So I have actually got quite a few things in my toolbox now that I use that help me. And obviously spending time with my son, being on the beach, in the woods, any of that stuff.
Sounds like you live in a very mindful life, Kierra.
I try.
And you're based in Jersey, are you?
Yeah, Jersey.
Yeah, I lived there for a short period when I was a very young man. I remember St. Juan's Bay as being one of the most beautiful places in the world.
Yeah, that's a surface sport. So when I was injured from sport, actually, I was like, I need to do something. So I started learning to surf, and I spent hours and hours and hours in the sea. But there's a beach called Plymouth Bay. So if you ever come back to Jersey, you have to go there. And it's like, you wouldn't even believe it's in the UK. I love it. It's like the best beach ever.
Great to have that tip.
Good tip.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kierra.
Great to meet you.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to meet you both too. Thank you very much for having me.